Hello listeners, how was your day? What time is it where you are right now? Whether you're winding down for the evening in New York, catching a late night moment of solitude in London, or finding yourself awake in the small hours somewhere across the globe, you've found your way here for a reason. Tonight's story comes from the shadows of European history, where the line between documented fact and whispered conspiracy grows thin. Before we begin, if you enjoy these deep dives into the darker corners of our world, please subscribe to Sleep Theories. Your support helps us continue exploring the stories that refuse to stay buried. Now, settle in, turn down the lights, and prepare for a tale that asks a simple, terrifying question. What if the secret armies of the Cold War never truly disbanded? What if they simply evolved? From the Journal of Gabriel Klein, Berlin, October 2023. The call came at 3:47 a.m. on a Tuesday that felt like the end of something important. My father was dead. Apparent suicide, the Berlin police told me over a crackling international line. I was in Prague at the time, chasing down a story about corruption in EU agricultural subsidies, the kind of mundane investigative work that paid the bills but never quite satisfied the restless hunger I'd inherited from my father's profession. Colonel Dieter Klein, found in his apartment on Friedrichshain. I'm sorry for your loss. Suicide. The word sat in my mouth like broken glass. I knew my father the way most children of career military men know their fathers. Through absence, through the weight of unspoken service, through the particular brand of silence that comes from keeping state secrets. Colonel Dieter Klein, NATO intelligence, stationed everywhere and nowhere. A man who spoke 7 languages fluently but rarely said what he meant in any of them. But suicide? Number. Not the man who taught me to check locks twice, to vary my routes home, to never trust the first explanation for anything. I caught the first flight to Berlin. The apartment was a crime scene wrapped in bureaucratic efficiency, yellow tape, clipboard-wielding officers, the clinical aftermath of sudden death. But what struck me most was how undisturbed everything looked. No signs of struggle, no overturned furniture, just my father's body, found slumped over his desk in the study, a Luger P-08, his service weapon from decades past, beside his right hand. "The note," said Detective Kruger, a thin man with tired eyes who seemed genuinely sorry to be there. He handed me a sealed evidence bag containing a single sheet of paper, my father's careful handwriting across it. I can no longer carry the weight of what I know. Some secrets are too heavy for one man. Gabriel, forgive me. The handwriting was his, the sentiment was not. In 27 years of being Dieter Klein's son, I had never once heard him speak of carrying weights or seeking forgiveness. He was a man who compartmentalized everything, who treated classified information like radioactive material. Dangerous, but manageable if you followed proper protocols. After the coroner removed the body and the police finished their documentation, I was left alone in the apartment. Officially, I was there to gather personal effects. Unofficially, I was there because something about this entire situation felt orchestrated, and my father had taught me to trust that feeling. I started in his study. The desk where he'd been found was meticulous, as always. File folders arranged by subject, correspondence sorted by date, his Mont Blanc fountain pen placed parallel to a leather-bound calendar. But there was something off about the calendar. It was turned to March 1983, not October 2023, 40 years in the past. I flipped through the pages. Most were blank, but March 15th, 1983 had a single notation. GLADIO, black sun level. Archive sealed. Duration indefinite. Gladio. The word meant sword in Italian, but I knew it as something else entirely. Operation Gladio had been NATO's stay-behind network during the Cold War. Secret armies hidden across Western Europe, ready to conduct guerrilla warfare if the Soviets ever invaded. It had been exposed in the 1990s, officially disbanded, relegated to history books and conspiracy theory forums. But here it was, in my father's handwriting, with a classification level I'd never heard of. Black Sun. I spent the next 4 hours methodically searching the apartment. My father was not a sentimental man, but he was thorough. If he had left me clues, they would be hidden in plain sight, disguised as ordinary possessions. I found the first piece in his bedroom closet, tucked inside an old NATO manual on psychological operations. A photograph, black and white, showing a group of men in civilian clothes standing outside what looked like a farmhouse. The back was stamped with a date, August 12, 1983, and a location, somewhere in the Ardennes. My father was third from the left, younger, wearing the kind of serious expression I remembered from my childhood. But it was the other faces that made my pulse quicken. I recognised one of them, Marcus Voltmann, who had served as Deputy Director of the German Federal Intelligence Service until his death in 2019. Another face belonged to a man I'd seen in newspapers, Alessandro Grimaldi, an Italian industrialist who had died in a car accident in Rome just 2 months ago. Both deaths had been reported as natural causes or accidents. Both men had been in their 70s. Both had been apparently part of something called Gladio, black sun level. The second piece was hidden in his kitchen, taped to the underside of a drawer I almost didn't think to check. A key attached to a small metal tag engraved with an address. Dresdner Bank, Unter den Linden 21, Box 247. The third piece was the most disturbing. I found it in his bathroom medicine cabinet behind a bottle of prescription medication I knew he didn't take. My father distrusted doctors almost as much as he distrusted coincidences. Inside the bottle were not pills, but several rolled-up documents, maps, detailed architectural plans of buildings across Europe, a courthouse in Brussels, a government complex in Rome, what looked like a parliamentary building in The Hague. Each map was marked with small red X's in various locations, storage rooms, basement levels, places where things could be hidden. I sat on my father's bathroom floor at 11:30 p.m, surrounded by evidence of something I didn't understand, holding documents that probably shouldn't exist. The smart thing would have been to take everything to the police, to Detective Kruger, to let the proper authorities handle whatever this was. But my father had been a proper authority, and proper authorities had declared his death a suicide. I gathered everything, the photograph, the key, the maps, the calendar notation, and stuffed them into a leather messenger bag that had belonged to my father. Whatever Gladio, black sun level, meant, whatever had gotten my father killed, because I was now certain he had been killed, it was connected to places and people across Europe. As I prepared to leave the apartment, I noticed something I had missed earlier. On the small table beside the front door, where my father always kept his keys and wallet, there was a train ticket. Berlin to Vienna, dated for the following day. A ticket he would never use. Unless, of course, someone else was meant to use it. I locked the apartment and walked out into the cold Berlin night, carrying my father's secrets and his final message, that some truths are too dangerous to die with their keepers, and that the networks we thought had been buried with the Cold War were still very much alive. The next morning I boarded the train to Vienna. The Dresdner Bank on Unter den Linden had the kind of institutional solidity that suggested it had survived multiple regime changes by being useful to whoever happened to be in power. The safe deposit box area was located in the basement, behind steel doors that whispered shut with the finality of a tomb ceiling. Box 247 required 2 keys, the one I'd found in my father's apartment and another held by the bank. The clerk, a middle-aged woman with the practised discretion of someone who had seen enough to ask no questions, led me into a small viewing room and left me alone with my father's final deposit. Inside the box, more photographs, more documents, and a leather-bound journal with OSSANIGRA embossed on the cover in faded gold letters. Black Bone. My father had always preferred Latin for his most sensitive files, a habit from his early days in NATO intelligence, when code names carried the weight of empires. The journal was divided into sections, each one documenting what appeared to be a systematic analysis of terrorist attacks, political assassinations, and economic crises across Europe from 1991 to 2023. But these weren't random events. They were connected by dates, by methods, by an underlying pattern that made my hands shake as I read. March 11th, 2004, Madrid train bombings. Official narrative, Al-Qaeda-inspired cell. Reality. Operational signature consistent with Gladio methodology. Outcome. Spanish Socialist Workers' Party victory. Troop withdrawal from Iraq. Note. Pattern recognition suggests state-level coordination. May 6th, 2002, Pim Fortuyn assassination, Netherlands. Official narrative, lone environmental activist. Reality. Volkert van der G had no prior history of political violence. Outcome. Major shift in Dutch immigration policy debate. Note. Timing coincides with EU enlargement negotiations. March 22nd, 2016. Brussels airport and metro bombings. Official narrative. ISIS-coordinated attacks. Reality. Security failures too systematic to be coincidental. Outcome. Enhanced EU surveillance legislation passed within 60 days. Note. Target selection suggests intimate knowledge of EU emergency protocols. Page after page of similar entries, each one dissecting major European crises with the clinical precision of a pathologist examining evidence of murder. But the most chilling section was titled Directive EOS Operational Parameters. The Gladio network was never disbanded. Classification changed from NATO oversight to Private European Consortium 1991. Mission parameters updated. No longer passive resistance to Soviet occupation, but active management of European political stability through controlled crisis induction. Key principle. Democratic societies require periodic trauma to maintain cohesion. Fear creates unity. Unity enables governance. Governance ensures stability. Operational structure. Tier 1. Policy architects. Unknown, estimated 12 to 15 individuals. Tier 2. Operational commanders. Former NATO intelligence personnel. Tier 3. Field assets, recruited from military, police, private security. Tier 4. Disposable elements, radicalized individuals, criminal networks. Primary methods. 1. Tension strategy. Create opposing extremes to justify centrist control. 2. False flag operations, attribute attacks to predetermined enemy groups. 3. Economic manipulation, coordinate crises with legislative opportunities. 4. Media management, control narrative through embedded assets. I photographed every page with my phone, my hands growing steadier as the magnitude of what I was reading became clear. This wasn't conspiracy theory. This was operational intelligence, documented evidence of a shadow network that had spent 30 years manipulating European politics through manufactured terror. But it was the final section that made me understand why my father had died. Operation Canary Protocol. Scheduled March 24th, 2024. Target European Parliament, Brussels. Method explosive device, basement level 2, during emergency session on digital surveillance legislation. Attribution eco-extremist cell, assets already in place. Outcome passage of comprehensive digital monitoring framework, EU-wide implementation within 180 days. Personal note, I cannot allow this to proceed. 30 years of complicity ends here. If this journal is being read, I've either been successful in exposing Directive EOS, or I have been eliminated to protect the operation. Gabriel, you must decide which. DK. The date was 6 months in the future. The European Parliament was scheduled to vote on new surveillance legislation in March 2024, legislation that had been struggling to gain support from privacy advocates and civil liberties groups across the EU. A bombing during the vote, attributed to environmental terrorists, would guarantee its passage. I closed the journal and sat in the sterile silence of the bank's viewing room, trying to process what my father had discovered. The attacks that had shaped European politics for the past 3 decades, the bombings, the shootings, the assassinations that had driven immigration policy, surveillance laws, economic integration, hadn't been organic expressions of political violence. They had been carefully orchestrated events, designed to create the exact political outcomes that followed. Directive EOS wasn't responding to European crises, it was creating them. My phone buzzed. A text message from an unknown number. Your father was a good man who made a difficult choice. If you want to understand what he died trying to stop, meet me at Café Einstein on Kurfürstendamm at 8 p.m. tomorrow. Come alone. -CW. I flipped through the journal again looking for those initials. I found them in a margin note on page 47. CW. MI6 liaison. 1998 to 2012. Unconfirmed affection. Status unknown. Someone else knew about Directive EOS. Someone else was willing to risk contact. I returned the journal to the safe deposit box, keeping the photocopies on my phone, and walked out of the bank into the Vienna afternoon. The city looked the same as when I had arrived that morning, but I felt like I was seeing it through different eyes. Every police officer, every surveillance camera, every official building now carried the potential weight of conspiracy. That evening I sat in my hotel room and began cross-referencing the events in my father's journal with public records, news reports, and academic analyses. The pattern became even clearer when viewed through the lens of European integration. Every major crisis had preceded significant transfers of sovereignty from national governments to EU institutions. Every terrorist attack had been followed by enhanced security legislation. Every economic panic had resulted in greater financial integration. The European Union hadn't evolved naturally through democratic consensus. It had been shaped, crisis by crisis, into its current form by a shadow network that understood how to use fear as a political tool. And tomorrow, I was going to meet someone who might be able to help me prove it. Café Einstein on Kurfürstendamm retained the worn elegance of old Berlin, dark wood panelling, brass fixtures, and the kind of clientele that valued privacy over trendiness. I arrived 15 minutes early and chose a table in the back corner where I could watch both the front entrance and the service entrance that led to the kitchen. My father had taught me these habits without ever explicitly teaching them. The awareness of exits, the preference for corners, the automatic cataloguing of faces, all part of a worldview that assumed someone was always watching, always listening, always ready to turn a routine meeting into something dangerous. At exactly 8 p.m, a woman in her 50s entered the cafe. Medium height, grey hair pulled back in a practical bun, wearing the kind of unremarkable clothing designed to avoid attention. She scanned the room once, located me immediately, and walked over with the measured pace of someone who had spent decades in rooms where quick movements could be misinterpreted. "Gabriel Klein," she said, extending a hand. "Clara Westbrook, I'm sorry about your father." Her accent was educated British, but with the slight flatness that suggested years of living in non-English speaking countries. Her handshake was firm without being aggressive, professional without being cold. "You knew him well?" I asked as she sat down across from me. "Well enough to know that he didn't kill himself." She ordered tea from the waitress, then leaned forward slightly. "Well enough to know that you found his journal in Vienna, and well enough to know that you're trying to decide whether I'm here to help you or eliminate you." The directness was oddly reassuring. In my experience, people who intended harm rarely announced their awareness of your suspicions. Which are you here to do? Help. Though I should warn you that the distinction might not matter much longer. She waited for the waitress to deliver her tea and move out of earshot. "How much do you know about Operation Gladio?" "The official version? NATO's stay-behind networks during the Cold War, exposed in the 1990s, officially disbanded, the version in my father's journal, something called Directive EOS that never went away." Clara nodded. "The official version is what they tell university students and documentary filmmakers. The reality is more complicated." She sipped her tea, considering her words. "I spent 14 years with MI6, most of it as a liaison with European intelligence services. I've seen the architecture that your father documented. It's real, it's active, and it's more sophisticated than anything we faced during the Cold War. You defected. I retired, officially. Unofficially, I started asking too many questions about operations that didn't match their stated objectives." She reached into her purse and withdrew a small digital recorder. "This is from a briefing I attended in 2019, Joint Intelligence Coordination meeting, held at a private facility outside London. I wasn't supposed to record it." She pressed play. The audio quality was poor, but the voices were clear enough. Voice 1, British accent. "The Italian operation exceeded expectations. Public support for enhanced border security increased by 37% following the incident." Voice 2, German accent. Correlation with the refugee legislation vote? Voice 1. Passed by a wider margin than our most optimistic projections. The strategy of managed instability continues to yield predictable results. Voice 3. French accent. What about the journalist inquiries? Voice 1. Contained. 3 separate investigations terminated due to lack of cooperative sources. Our media assets continue to perform effectively. Voice 2. Timeline for the next phase? Voice 1. 18 months. The Eastern European integration protocols require another calibration event, something with higher visibility than Rome, but lower casualties than Paris. Clara stopped the recording. This was recorded 6 months before the Vienna Christmas market attack. 11 dead, 37 wounded, attributed to a radicalised Syrian refugee who had been in Austria for less than 2 months. You're saying the attack was orchestrated? I'm saying the attack served exactly the political purposes outlined in that briefing, and that the perpetrator had connections to security services that were never fully investigated. Clara leaned back in her chair. The European Union wasn't created through democratic consensus, Gabriel. It was engineered through systematic crisis management. Every major integration milestone has been preceded by a traumatic event that made the next level of political unification seem necessary for public safety. She was describing the same pattern my father had documented, but with the authority of someone who had been inside the system. Why are you telling me this? Because your father was trying to stop something that will make everything we've discussed look like preparation. She pulled out a tablet and showed me a series of satellite photographs. These were taken last month at a private training facility in the Swiss Alps. Officially, it's a corporate retreat centre owned by a Luxembourg-based holding company. Unofficially, it's where Directive EOS has been preparing for Operation Canary Protocol. The photographs showed men in military-style clothing conducting what appeared to be urban warfare exercises. Mock buildings designed to look like government facilities, training scenarios that involved explosive devices and evacuation procedures. March 24th, 2024, I said. The European Parliament vote on the Digital Security Framework, the most comprehensive surveillance legislation ever proposed in a democratic society. It's been stalled in committee for 8 months because of civil liberties concerns. Clara switched to another set of photos. But a terrorist attack during the vote itself, broadcast live across Europe, would change that calculation very quickly. The eco-extremist attribution? Already in place. A network of radicalised environmental activists, most of whom don't know they're being manipulated. The actual bombing will be carried out by professionals, but the investigators will find exactly the evidence they need to blame it on a group that has been infiltrated and guided for the past 2 years. I thought about the timeline in my father's journal. He was going to expose this. He was going to try, but Directive EOS has survived 30 years by being very good at eliminating problems before they become public. Clara finished her tea and stood up. Your father made copies of everything and gave them to me before he died. I've been trying to figure out how to use them without getting myself killed in the process. And now I'm running out of time. The operation is 6 months away, and I don't have the resources to stop it alone. She handed me a business card with only a phone number printed on it. If you want to finish what your father started, call me tomorrow, but understand what you're choosing. These people have spent 3 decades perfecting the art of making problems disappear. She walked out of the cafe, leaving me alone with the weight of decision. I could return to Prague, file my agricultural corruption story, and pretend I had never found my father's journal. Or I could make the choice he had made, to risk everything to expose a conspiracy that had shaped European history through systematic terror. I sat in Café Einstein until closing time, thinking about democracy and manipulation, about the difference between organic political evolution and engineered consent. By the time I walked back to my hotel, I had made my decision. The next morning I called Clara Westbrook. Clara's safe house was a modest apartment in Berlin's Prenzlauer Berg district, the kind of renovated East German housing that attracted artists and academics who valued authenticity over luxury. But the ordinariness was deceptive. I noticed the reinforced door, the blackout curtains, and the subtle electronic equipment that suggested the apartment was designed for more than comfortable living. "Welcome to my retirement," Clara said, leading me into a living room that had been converted into something resembling an intelligence analyst's office. "I've been working on this for 4 years, ever since I started putting together the pattern your father documented." The walls were covered with timelines, photographs and organisational charts connected by different coloured strings. It looked like the workspace of either a brilliant investigator or a paranoid conspiracy theorist, and I realised that in this case there might not be much difference between the two. "The key insight," Clara continued, settling into a chair beside a desk covered with documents, "is understanding that Directive EOS isn't a continuation of the original Gladio network. It's an evolution. The Cold War version was designed to resist occupation. The modern version is designed to manage democracy." She walked me through the organisational structure she had pieced together. At the top, a coordination council comprised of former intelligence officials, defence contractors, and financial executives from across Europe. Below them, operational commanders drawn from the ranks of NATO's Special Operations Community. At the bottom, networks of assets that ranged from radicalised true believers to criminal organisations to private military contractors. "The genius of the system," Clara explained, "is that most of the people involved don't know they're part of a larger operation. The eco-extremists who will be blamed for the Brussels bombing think they're part of an authentic environmental resistance movement. The security contractors who will respond to the attack think they're providing legitimate protective services. Even some of the operational commanders think they're conducting authorised counter-terrorism exercises. Compartmentalisation. Exactly. It's the same principle that allowed the original Gladio network to remain hidden for 50 years. Each cell only knows what it needs to know to perform its function. The overall coordination happens at a level that's invisible to the operational personnel." Clara showed me financial records she had obtained through contacts in European banking. Shell companies registered in Luxembourg, Cyprus, and the Isle of Man. Money flowing from defence contractors, security consulting firms, and investment funds with connections to major European corporations. "The funding structure is particularly elegant," she said. "Every major corporation in Europe benefits from increased security spending, enhanced surveillance capabilities, and political stability. They're not funding terrorism, they're investing in market predictability." But it was the operational details of the Canary Protocol that made the conspiracy feel real and immediate. Clara had obtained architectural plans of the European Parliament building, security protocols for special sessions and communication intercepts that revealed the attack timeline. "March 24th, 2024, 2:15 p.m. local time," she said, pointing to a detailed floor plan. "The digital security framework vote is scheduled to begin at 2 p.m. At 2:15, during the preliminary debate phase, an explosive device will detonate in the building's basement level, directly beneath the main parliamentary chamber. The device itself would be relatively small, enough to cause structural damage and casualties, but not enough to completely destroy the building. The goal wasn't maximum destruction, but maximum psychological impact. The attack would be broadcast live across European media, creating the traumatic images necessary to ensure the surveillance legislation passed immediately. The beauty of the timing," Clara continued, "is that the vote will be suspended but not cancelled. Within hours, emergency procedures will be invoked to reconvene the Parliament at a secure location. The digital security framework will be presented not as optional legislation, but as an emergency response to an ongoing terrorist threat." And the attribution to eco-extremists? Clara showed me surveillance photos of environmental activists across Europe, many of whom had been under observation for months. The network has been infiltrated at every level. When investigators examine the bombing, they'll find exactly the evidence they need: radical environmental literature, connections to known eco-extremist groups, communications planning further attacks on industrial targets. The most chilling aspect was how little of it was actually fabricated. The eco-extremist network was real. It had simply been guided and manipulated by assets working for Directive EOS. The literature was authentic, radical environmental theory. The communications were genuine planning sessions for future actions. The only manufactured element was the connection to the parliamentary bombing itself. "The investigators won't be finding planted evidence," Clara explained. they'll be finding real evidence that has been carefully cultivated to lead to predetermined conclusions. I spent 3 days in Clara's apartment, reviewing documents and understanding the scope of what my father had discovered. The Canary Protocol wasn't just one operation, it was the culmination of 3 decades of systematic political manipulation. If it succeeded, the European Union would have legal authority to monitor all digital communications, financial transactions, and physical movements of every person within its borders. Total information awareness, I said. Total social control, Clara corrected. The surveillance framework includes provisions for predictive intervention, not just monitoring what people do, but predicting what they might do and taking preventive action. On the 3rd day, Clara showed me the most sensitive documents, communications she had intercepted between operational commanders preparing for the Brussels attack. Code names, timing details, extraction procedures for the personnel who would carry out the bombing. This is enough to stop them, I said. This is enough to expose one operation, Clara replied. But Directive EOS has survived for 30 years by being prepared for exposure. If we stop the Canary Protocol, they'll simply activate a different operation with different targets and different attribution. So what do you suggest? Clara was quiet for a long moment, looking at the walls covered with evidence of a conspiracy that had shaped European politics through manufactured terror. We don't just expose the operation, we expose the system. She opened a file cabinet and withdrew a final set of documents. Personal records of the Coordination Council members, financial flows between defence contractors and intelligence services, communication intercepts going back 15 years. Your father wasn't just trying to stop a bombing, he was trying to reveal the entire architecture of European deep state manipulation. The question is whether you're willing to take the risk he took. I thought about my father, found dead at his desk with a suicide note that didn't match his character. I thought about 30 years of terrorist attacks that had consistently produced the exact political outcomes required for European integration. I thought about democracy and manipulation, about the difference between authentic political evolution and systematic social engineering. What do we need to do? Clara smiled for the first time since I had met her. We need to commit journalism, real journalism, the kind that changes everything. The plan Clara proposed was elegantly simple. Simultaneous release of the Directive EOS documents to major newspapers across Europe, timed for maximum impact 2 weeks before the scheduled Brussels attack. Le Monde in France, Der Spiegel in Germany, The Guardian in Britain, La Repubblica in Italy. Enough coverage across enough countries to make suppression impossible. The key is coordination, Clara explained as we prepared the document packages. If one newspaper receives the material alone, they can be pressured, discredited, or simply ignored. But if the story breaks simultaneously across multiple countries, it becomes impossible to contain. We spent a week preparing the releases, carefully organising the evidence to tell a coherent story that would be accessible to readers who had never heard of Operation Gladio or Directive EOS. Each package included the historical background, the organisational structure, the financial connections, and the specific operational details of the Canary Protocol. But it was the personal documents that would make the story undeniable. Communications between Coordination Council members discussing specific attacks, financial records, showing money flows from corporate accounts to operational assets, surveillance footage of training exercises at the Swiss facility. The beautiful thing about conspiracies, Clara said as we sealed the final packages, is that they require documentation. You can't coordinate complex operations across multiple countries without leaving traces, and people who think they're protected by secrecy tend to be careless about evidence. On February 15th, 2024, exactly 5 weeks before the scheduled Brussels attack, we delivered the packages simultaneously to journalists in 4 European capitals. Then we waited. The first response came from Der Spiegel. Their investigative team called within 6 hours of receiving the documents, asking detailed questions about sources and verification procedures. By the end of the day, they confirmed our contact information for follow-up interviews. The Guardian responded next with a more cautious approach that involved extensive fact-checking with their security correspondents and consultation with legal advisors about potential national security implications, Le Monde took 3 days to respond, but when they did, it was with news that they had independently verified several of the financial transactions we had documented, using sources within European banking that we hadn't known existed. La Repubblica was the most direct. They wanted to interview both Clara and me on camera, with full identification, understanding that going public would eliminate any chance of anonymity or safety. For 2 weeks, we worked with journalists across Europe, providing additional documentation, clarifying timeline details, and explaining the historical context that made DirecTV EOS possible. It felt like the kind of journalism that my father had always described but rarely practiced, the methodical exposure of systematic deception. On March 1st, 2024, the stories broke simultaneously. The headlines were everything we had hoped for. Der Spiegel, Gladio reborn, secret network manipulated European politics through terror. The Guardian, the deep state that never left, how NATO's Cold War army became Europe's shadow government. Le Monde, Directive EOS, les documents secrets d'un réseau terroriste d'État. La Repubblica, la rete dell'ombra, come il terrore fabbricato ha plasmato l'Europa. For 48 hours, the story dominated European media. Television news programs featured extensive segments on the historical background of Operation Gladio and the modern implications of DirecTV EOS. Radio shows hosted experts on intelligence history and European integration. Social media exploded with commentary, analysis, and demands for official investigations. Clara and I gave interviews to dozens of journalists explaining the evidence and answering questions about the operational details we had uncovered. For the first time in my career, I felt like I was practicing journalism the way it was supposed to work, exposing systematic deception and holding powerful institutions accountable to democratic oversight. But on March 3rd, the pushback began. The first signs were subtle. Follow-up articles that questioned the authenticity of some documents, experts who raised concerns about the reliability of intelligence defectors, editorial commentary that suggested the story might be a disinformation campaign designed to destabilise European security cooperation. Then came the more direct responses. Government officials in multiple countries held press conferences acknowledging that historical stay-behind networks had existed during the Cold War, but firmly denying any continuation into the modern era. Intelligence services released statements describing the documents as fabricated materials consistent with foreign disinformation operations. Corporate media owners, defence contractors, and political leaders who were named in the documents began coordinating legal responses. Libel suits were filed in multiple jurisdictions. Bank records were sealed under national security provisions. Key witnesses received legal threats that made them unavailable for further interviews. By March 10th, the story was being described as a discredited conspiracy theory by the same newspapers that had initially treated it as legitimate investigative journalism. "This is how they survive," Clara said, as we watched our carefully documented exposé being systematically discredited. "They don't deny the evidence. They create enough doubt about the evidence that the public stops paying attention." But the most direct response came on March 15th. I was staying in a hotel in Munich, having moved frequently since the story broke to avoid the kind of retaliation that had apparently killed my father. At 3:30 a.m, the fire alarm in the hotel began ringing. I grabbed my laptop and documents and joined the evacuation, standing outside in the cold German morning while fire crews investigated what turned out to be a false alarm, a malfunction in the building's alarm system. When I returned to my room, it had been searched. Professional, careful, but unmistakable. Nothing was missing, but everything had been slightly displaced. The message was clear. We know where you are, we know what you're doing, and we can reach you whenever we choose. That afternoon, Clara called with news that made the personal threat seem almost trivial. The Brussels attack has been postponed. Intelligence sources are reporting that the eco-extremist cell has gone underground, apparently spooked by increased security attention. We stopped it. We delayed it. But Gabriel, there's something else. The Digital Security Framework vote has been rescheduled for May 15th. and I'm hearing reports of increased activity at training facilities in Eastern Europe. The Canary Protocol had been disrupted, but Directive EOS was adapting. New operational plans, new attribution strategies, new timelines designed to achieve the same political objectives through different methods. On March 18th, Clara disappeared. Her apartment was empty when I arrived for our scheduled meeting. Not burglarised, not obviously disturbed, but completely vacant. No furniture, no documents, no trace that anyone had ever lived there. Even the telephone connection had been discontinued. I waited outside the building for 6 hours, hoping she would return. Instead, I was approached by a man in his 40s, wearing the kind of unremarkable business attire that suggested professional surveillance training. "Mr. Klein," he said, his accent carrying traces of multiple European languages. "Ms. Westbrook asked me to give you this if something happened to her." He handed me a sealed envelope and walked away before I could ask questions. Inside was a single sheet of paper with Clara's handwriting. "Gabriel, if you're reading this, they've moved me to a place where I can't cause further problems. The game is bigger than either of us understood. The documents we released were real, but they were also bait. Directive EOS wanted to know who else had access to their operational details. Now they know. The network is preparing for a reset, new operational parameters, new personnel, new methods. Your father understood this possibility. Check his Vienna box again. There's a second compartment, the real insurance policy. Trust no one in official positions. Democracy is a luxury they can no longer afford to allow." I returned to Vienna that night, travelling by train and paying cash to avoid creating electronic records. The Dresdner Bank's safe deposit box area felt different this time, more threatening, as if the institutional discretion that had protected my father's secrets was now part of the system working against me. Box 247 appeared exactly as I had left it, but Clara's note had mentioned a second compartment. I examined the metal interior more carefully and found what I had missed before, a thin metal panel at the back that moved when pressed. Behind it, a space barely large enough to hold a small notebook and a data storage device. The notebook contained a single entry in my father's handwriting, dated the day before his death. March 15th, 2024, final entry. Directive EOS has evolved beyond my original understanding. The network we documented is only the operational level. Above it exists what they call the Reset Protocol, a contingency plan for total political restructuring of European governance if the current manipulation strategies become ineffective. The goal is no longer democratic consensus achieved through manufactured crisis. The goal is post-democratic governance justified by permanent emergency. The attached drive contains communications between Coordination Council members and financial backers discussing implementation timelines. The European Union, as currently constituted, will be dissolved within 5 years, replaced by a more directly controlled system that eliminates the inefficiencies of electoral politics. Clara's expose strategy was always a long shot. Even if successful, it would only force them to accelerate the reset protocol, but exposure remains our only option. If this information becomes public, it might create enough political pressure to disrupt their timeline. Gabriel, I know you will find this eventually. You have always been more persistent than cautious, like your mother. Use that persistence now. The drive contains everything. Financial records, personnel files, operational plans, communication intercepts. Everything needed to prove that European democracy has been under systematic attack for 30 years. But be aware of the cost. Publishing this information will mark you as a permanent target. They will use every resource at their disposal to discredit, intimidate, or eliminate you. Choose carefully. I am proud of the man you have become. I am sorry I could not be a better father while I was alive. Perhaps I can be a better one through this final gift. Per aspera ad astra. DK. The data drive contained nearly 50 gigabytes of files, audio recordings of Coordination Council meetings, video surveillance of training exercises, financial transaction records going back 15 years, personnel files with photographs and operational histories, and detailed plans for what my father had called the Reset Protocol. The scope was breathtaking. Directive, EOS hadn't just been manipulating individual crises. They had been systematically engineering the political evolution of the entire European continent. Every major integration milestone, every expansion of EU authority, every reduction in national sovereignty had been preceded by carefully orchestrated events designed to make the next level of centralisation seem necessary. But the reset protocol went far beyond manipulation. It was a blueprint for eliminating European democracy entirely, replacing elected governments with appointed technocratic councils answerable only to the coordination structure that had been operating in secret for 3 decades. The timeline was aggressive. Economic crises in 2024 and 2025 that would justify emergency financial powers, security threats in 2026 that would require suspension of normal democratic procedures, and complete restructuring by 2028 that would make the transition permanent. I sat in the sterile viewing room of the Dresdner Bank, surrounded by evidence of the most sophisticated political conspiracy in modern history, facing the choice my father had described: expose everything and accept the consequences, or remain silent and allow the systematic destruction of European democracy to proceed. There was really no choice at all. I copied the entire contents of the drive to multiple secure storage systems, prepared comprehensive documentation packages for journalists across Europe and North America, and began the process of releasing everything my father had died trying to expose. But this time, I didn't limit myself to traditional media. I sent the files to WikiLeaks, to independent journalists operating outside corporate media structures, to academic researchers studying intelligence history, to civil liberties organisations, to anyone who might have the resources and independence to ensure the information reached the public. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within 48 hours, the story was being covered by media outlets across 6 continents. Government officials who had successfully discredited our previous revelations found themselves unable to contain the flood of documentation proving their involvement in systematic deception. The financial records alone were enough to trigger investigations in multiple countries. Bank accounts that had funneled money from major corporations to operational assets. Shell companies that had provided cover for weapons purchases and training facility rentals. Investment funds that had profited from the security spending that followed each manufactured crisis. But it was the audio recordings that made denial impossible. Hours of conversations between Coordination Council members discussing specific operations, casualty calculations, and political outcomes. Voices that could be identified through forensic analysis, discussing crimes that could be prosecuted under both national and international law. For 1 week, it seemed like the exposé might actually succeed. Parliamentary committees launched investigations. Journalists began connecting decades of suspicious events to the Directive EOS network. Public opinion polls showed widespread support for comprehensive intelligence oversight reforms. Then, on April 15, 2024, everything changed. A series of coordinated cyber attacks brought down electrical grids across Germany, France, and Belgium. The attacks were attributed to Russian state-sponsored hackers, but the timing and sophistication suggested something more complex. Within hours, emergency powers were invoked that suspended normal legal procedures and authorised enhanced surveillance measures. The digital security framework, which had been stalled in committee for months, was passed by emergency decree. The parliamentary investigations into Directive EOS were suspended pending completion of the cybersecurity crisis. Media outlets that had been covering the conspiracy were restricted from publishing sensitive materials that might compromise ongoing security operations. By May 1st, 2024, the story had disappeared from European media entirely. I was staying in a small hotel in Prague when I received the final message. It came as a text from an unknown number. "The game is over. Your father played it as well as anyone could. You have accomplished more than he thought possible, but the reset protocol has been activated. European democracy ends on schedule. There is no off switch now, only silence." 3 days later, Clara's body was found in a canal in Amsterdam. The official cause of death was listed as accidental drowning, complicated by alcohol intoxication. The investigation was closed within a week. I returned to Berlin for the final time to settle my father's estate and close his apartment. Among his personal effects, I found one item I had missed during my original search. A letter addressed to me, sealed and marked to be opened only if Directive EOS succeeds. Inside, my father's final message: Gabriel, if you are reading this, the expose failed and the reset protocol has been implemented. Do not blame yourself. The system we tried to expose had 30 years to perfect its defences. Democratic oversight was always a luxury they could withdraw when it became inconvenient. The most important thing to understand is that this was never really about terrorism or security, or even political control. It was about the fundamental incompatibility between global capitalism and democratic governance. The corporations and financial institutions that funded Directive EOS weren't paying for political manipulation, they were paying for market predictability. Democracy creates uncertainty. Elections can change economic policies. Public opinion can interfere with profitable ventures. International crises can disrupt supply chains. The reset protocol eliminates these inefficiencies by replacing democratic decision-making with appointed technocratic management. It's not evil in the traditional sense. It's simply the logical evolution of a system that values economic efficiency over political freedom. By the time you read this, the transformation will be largely complete. The European Union will have been restructured as a more direct administrative system. Elections will still be held, but they will be advisory rather than determinative. Real power will rest with coordination councils appointed by the same networks we tried to expose. You have a choice now. You can continue fighting a system that has already won, or you can document what happened for future generations who might find a way to reverse it. I recommend documentation. Witness is its own form of resistance. Your mother would be proud of your courage. I am proud of your integrity. Remember that democracy is not a permanent condition. It must be defended by each generation, or it disappears. Take care of yourself. Trust very few people. Write down everything you remember. With love and respect. D. K. I write this final entry from a small town in rural Canada, where I have lived quietly for the past 4 years under a name that is not my own. The European Union still exists on paper, but it functions as my father predicted. A technocratic administrative system where real power rests with appointed coordination councils that answer to the same networks we tried to expose. Elections are still held every few years, but they serve primarily as opinion surveys. Policy decisions are made by experts who understand the complex realities of modern governance. Public participation is limited to consultative forums that provide feedback on implementation strategies for decisions that have already been made. Most Europeans seem satisfied with the arrangement. The economy has been remarkably stable since the political restructuring. Terrorist attacks have virtually disappeared. Social services function efficiently under centralised coordination. Crime rates have dropped significantly under enhanced surveillance systems. The price, democratic self-governance, is rarely discussed in public forums. The transition was so gradual, so carefully managed, that many people never noticed they had lost the right to change the fundamental direction of their societies through electoral participation. I still receive occasional messages from sources who remain within the European system. The Directive EOS network continues to operate, but its mission has evolved from crisis creation to crisis prevention. Instead of manufacturing terrorism to justify political integration, they now monitor social media for signs of democratic unrest and implement preemptive measures to maintain stability. The reset protocol was more successful than its architects had dared hope. By eliminating the uncertainties of democratic politics, they created the kind of predictable governance environment that allows for long-term economic planning and social engineering. Europe has become more peaceful, more prosperous, and more efficient than at any time in its history. It has also ceased to be free in any meaningful sense. I think about my father often, and about Clara, and about the choice they made to resist a system that probably could not have been stopped. Their failure was inevitable, but their attempt was necessary. Someone had to try. Someone had to bear witness. Someone had to document what was lost and how it was lost. so that future generations might understand what democracy looked like and why it mattered. This journal is my contribution to that documentation. I have made copies and distributed them through channels that I hope will preserve them beyond the reach of the systems that now govern European society. Whether they will ever be read by people who have the power to restore what was lost, I cannot know. But I know that my father was right about one thing. Witness is its own form of resistance. The networks that eliminated European democracy succeeded because they understood something that democratic societies had forgotten. Political freedom is not a natural condition. It must be actively protected by each generation, or it disappears so gradually that its loss seems inevitable. Perhaps it was inevitable. Perhaps the tensions between global capitalism and democratic governance made some form of the reset protocol unavoidable. Perhaps the choice was never between freedom and control, but between managed authoritarianism and chaotic authoritarianism. But I prefer to believe that there were other possibilities, other paths that European societies might have taken if they had understood the nature of the threat they faced. The tragedy is not that democracy failed, but that it was murdered so skillfully that most people never realised it was dying. The echoes of Gladio have finally faded. The network that was created to defend European freedom from external enemies has completed its evolution into a system that eliminated European freedom to protect it from internal threats. The operation was perfect, the silence is complete, and somewhere, in boardrooms and coordination centres that exist outside democratic oversight, plans are being made for the next phase of social engineering, the next stage of political evolution, the next necessary sacrifice of human agency in the name of stability and efficiency. The game continues, but democracy is no longer one of the players. If this is your first time with sleep theories, welcome to our corner of the internet where we explore the stories that keep us awake at night, the mysteries that official reports never quite explain, and the questions that linger long after the news cycle moves on. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell. We've got investigations that will challenge everything you think you know about the world around us. My name is Daniel Rhodes, and for 32 years I analysed threats that didn't officially exist. NSA, CIA, a few acronyms that still don't have Wikipedia pages. I spent my career in the spaces between the lines of declassified documents. When I retired in 2012, I thought I was done with secrets. I thought I could finally sleep without wondering what shadows were moving in the dark corners of geopolitics. Then flight MH370 vanished, and sleep became a luxury I could no longer afford. March 8th, 2014, 12:41 AM local time. Malaysia Airlines Flight 370 pushes back from Gate C1 at Kuala Lumpur International Airport. Captain Zahari Ahmad Shah, 53 years old, 18,365 flight hours. First Officer Farik Abdul Hamid, 27 years old, transitioning to the Boeing 777. Between them, they carried the lives of 237 passengers and crew toward what should have been a routine 6-hour flight to Beijing Capital International Airport. The flight proceeded normally for exactly 38 minutes. At 1:19 AM, First Officer Hamid's voice crackled through the radio. "Good night, Malaysian 370. It was the last transmission anyone would officially acknowledge receiving from the aircraft. Within 2 minutes, the plane's transponder went silent. The secondary surveillance radar that had been tracking MH370 across Malaysian airspace suddenly showed nothing but empty sky. For the next 4 hours, Malaysian air traffic control waited. They made calls, they checked systems, they assumed technical difficulties, weather interference, communication failures, anything except the truth that was already unfolding 35,000 feet above the South China Sea. The plane had not crashed. It had not exploded. It had simply ceased to exist on every screen, every monitor, every system designed to track commercial aircraft across one of the world's busiest flight corridors. But here's what the public wasn't told in those first crucial hours. MH370 didn't just vanish from Malaysian radar. It disappeared from secondary surveillance systems across 3 countries simultaneously. The odds of spontaneous coordinated system failure across sovereign airspace boundaries are so astronomically low that they approach impossibility. I learned this not from CNN or the BBC, but from a phone call I received 6 months after the disappearance. The caller identified himself only as Mitchell, a voice I hadn't heard since a classified briefing in Langley sometime around 2009. "Danny," he said, using a nickname only 5 people on Earth were authorised to use, "you still got that security clearance." "Retired, not revoked," I replied. "Why?" "Look at Diego Garcia, and stop trusting the satellite data." The line went dead. Mitchell had always been a man of few words, but this was cryptic even for him. Diego Garcia, the US military atoll in the British Indian Ocean Territory, one of the most secretive bases on the planet. What could a missing Malaysian airliner possibly have to do with a facility that officially didn't conduct operations that required congressional oversight? I spent the next week telling myself to let it go. I was retired. I had a small house in Vermont, a garden that needed tending, and a pension that would keep me comfortable until the inevitable heart attack or cancer diagnosis that seems to find everyone in my former line of work. But Mitchell's words echoed in my mind with the persistence of a smoke alarm at 3 a.m. So I started digging. The first thing I discovered was that Diego Garcia's location placed it roughly 2,400 miles southwest of MH370's last known position, exactly within the range of a Boeing 777 carrying the fuel load that MH370 had taken on in Kuala Lumpur. The second thing I discovered was that there had been a suspicious gap in radar coverage along what I came to call the Southern Silence Corridor, a stretch of airspace between Indonesia and the southern Indian Ocean, where civilian and military radar systems created a blind spot large enough to hide a commercial airliner. The third thing I discovered changed everything. Inmarsat, the British satellite communications company, had been quietly collecting data from MH370 long after the plane's transponder went dark. Their satellites had continued to exchange handshake signals with the aircraft for 6 hours and 11 minutes after the last radar contact. 6 hours. The plane had not crashed in the South China Sea, as initial search efforts assumed. It had continued flying, following a path that led it far from any intended destination. The official investigation eventually acknowledged this data, but only after Malaysian authorities had spent weeks searching in entirely the wrong location. By the time search efforts shifted to the southern Indian Ocean, any physical evidence had been scattered by currents, weather, and time across an area roughly the size of the continental United States. But I had access to resources that the general public and most journalists did not. Through a network of former colleagues who owed favours to other former colleagues, I obtained copies of the raw Inmarsat data, complete with technical annotations that had been redacted from public releases. What I found in those margins made my hands shake as I read. The satellite pings showed that MH370 had not simply flown south and crashed. The aircraft had made a series of altitude changes and course corrections that suggested active piloting throughout its final hours. More troubling, the ping intervals showed periods where the aircraft appeared to be flying in holding patterns, circles in the sky, as if waiting for clearance to land somewhere. I cross-referenced the ping data with maritime traffic records from the Indian Ocean shipping lanes. On the night of March 8th, 2014, there had been an unusual absence of commercial vessels along MH370's projected flight path. Ships that should have been in the area according to their filed routes had mysteriously altered course or delayed departure from their previous ports. It was as if someone had cleared a corridor through one of the world's busiest shipping lanes. Then I found the eyewitness accounts. In September 2014, residents of Kuda Huvadhu Island in the Maldives reported seeing a low-flying aircraft around 6:15 a.m. local time on March 8th, roughly 6 hours after MH370's last radar contact. The aircraft was white with red stripes, consistent with Malaysia Airlines livery. It was flying unusually low, heading southwest toward the open ocean. The Maldivian government initially investigated these reports, then suddenly classified them and refused to comment further. When pressed by international media, officials claimed the sightings were not credible and suggested residents had mistaken a domestic flight for the missing airliner. But I knew something the Maldivian government apparently didn't want publicised. There were no scheduled domestic flights over Kuda Huvadu at 6:15 a.m. on March 8, 2014. The island's airport had been closed for runway maintenance since March 5th. The nearest aircraft that morning should have been a Maldivian air taxi flight that wasn't scheduled to depart Malé until 7:30 a.m, more than an hour later, and travelling in the opposite direction. Southwest of the Maldives lay 800 miles of empty ocean, then Diego Garcia. I began to construct a timeline that made my former career in intelligence analysis seem quaint by comparison. Malaysia Airlines Flight 3. 70 had not crashed. It had been diverted along a carefully planned route that avoided radar detection, maritime traffic, and civilian observation until the very last moment, when residents of a remote island happened to look up at the right time and see something they were never supposed to witness. But why? What could be worth orchestrating the disappearance of a commercial airliner and the deaths of 239 innocent people? The answer lay not in the aircraft itself, but in its passenger manifest. Every intelligence analyst learns to look for patterns that exist just below the surface of apparent randomness. Flight MH370's passenger list contained several patterns that should have triggered security reviews long before the aircraft ever left the ground. 20 passengers worked for Freescale Semiconductor, a Texas-based company specializing in microprocessors and embedded systems. They were traveling to Beijing for a technical conference, carrying laptops and documentation related to advanced radar and stealth technology applications. Among them was Dr. Chen Wei, a lead engineer on what Freescale internally called Project Mirror, research into electronic systems that could manipulate radar signatures in real time. 4 passengers were travelling on stolen Austrian and Italian passports. The men who had stolen these documents were identified within days of the disappearance, but the identities of the individuals who had used them to board MH370 remain unknown. Interpol confirmed that the stolen passport holders had purchased their tickets with cash through a travel agency in Bangkok that had no record of the transactions beyond the basic booking information. Then there was Yen Lo. Yen Lo was listed on the passenger manifest as a software consultant, travelling from Kuala Lumpur to Beijing. But Yen Lo was not a software consultant. According to files I obtained through channels that I cannot and will not identify, Yen Lo was a former Chinese military cyber analyst who had been quietly developing quantum encryption algorithms for the People's Liberation Army's 3rd Department, their Signals Intelligence Division. 6 months before MH370's disappearance, Yen Lo had approached the CIA through an intermediary, claiming he wanted to defect. He possessed what he described as breakthrough research in quantum-resistant encryption that could render current Western surveillance capabilities obsolete within a decade. The agency had been in preliminary negotiations with Yen Lo since December 2013, but those talks had stalled over disagreements about his financial demands and the security of his family members still living in mainland China. What Yen Lo didn't know, what he couldn't have known, was that his communications with the CIA had been intercepted by the National Security Agency's Special Collection Service, operating out of the US Embassy in Kuala Lumpur. The NSA had been tracking Yen Lo's movements, monitoring his communications, and building a profile of his research capabilities since October 2013. I spent weeks trying to reconstruct the intelligence picture that would have been available to decision-makers in the days before MH370's disappearance. What I found was a convergence of strategic interests that painted a very different picture of the flight's final hours. Freescale Semiconductor's largest institutional shareholder was a private equity firm called Jacob Partners, which had been linked in classified reports to DARPA, Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, funding for experimental radar systems. The 20 Freescale employees on MH370 weren't just attending a technical conference. They were carrying prototype hardware and source code for systems that could theoretically render aircraft invisible to conventional radar. Yen Lo's quantum encryption research represented a potential paradigm shift in signals intelligence. If his algorithms proved viable, they could invalidate decades of NSA investment in cryptographic analysis capabilities. More immediately, they could allow Chinese intelligence services to communicate in ways that Western agencies could never decrypt or even detect. The convergence was too perfect to be coincidental. On a single flight, travelling from a region with minimal air traffic control oversight toward Beijing, where both the free-scale technology and Yenlo's research would disappear into Chinese military development programs, were the components of what could become a decisive intelligence advantage for America's primary strategic rival. But there was one more pattern I couldn't ignore. 3 weeks before MH370's disappearance, a Boeing 777 identical to the aircraft that would become Flight 370 had been spotted at Diego Garcia during a routine satellite pass by a commercial imaging provider. The plane had been parked in a maintenance hangar normally reserved for US military aircraft. When I obtained higher resolution images through back-channel contacts, I could make out something that made my blood run cold. The aircraft's unique antenna array configuration matched MH370's specifications exactly. Someone had been planning this operation for weeks, possibly months. They had positioned assets, cleared flight corridors, and prepared facilities. All they needed was the right opportunity. A flight carrying passengers whose disappearance would serve multiple strategic objectives simultaneously. Flight MH370 had not been the victim of mechanical failure, pilot suicide, or hijacking by terrorists. It had been hijacked by the most sophisticated intelligence apparatus on Earth, using methods that most people couldn't imagine and wouldn't believe if they were told. But the operation hadn't ended with the aircraft's disappearance. In fact, that was only the beginning. In November 2015, 18 months after MH370's disappearance, I received an encrypted email from an address I didn't recognise. The message contained only a phone number and the words, Hangar 7, Test Flight 847. I stared at the screen for 10 minutes before I realised what I was looking at. Hangar 7 was a maintenance facility at Boeing's Everett plant, where experimental avionics systems were tested and installed. Test Flight 847 was a program I remembered from classified briefings in 2010, an attempt to develop optical camouflage systems for military aircraft. I called the number. Mr. Rhodes? The voice was nervous, middle-aged, with a slight southern accent. My name is Marcus Webb. I used to work for Boeing. I think we need to talk. We met 3 days later at a diner outside Everett, Washington. Marcus Webb was thin, pale, with the kind of perpetual exhaustion that comes from carrying secrets that are too heavy to sleep with. He had worked as an avionics technician for Boeing for 15 years, specialising in experimental radar and communication systems. In 2013, he had been assigned to a classified project that he knew only by its internal designation, Ghost Protocol. They told us we were developing stealth capabilities for the next generation of military transports, Webb explained, stirring sugar into coffee with hands that shook slightly. Optical masking at high altitudes. The idea was to make aircraft essentially invisible to both radar and visual observation by manipulating electromagnetic signatures in real time. The technology worked by using a network of sensors and transmitters built into the aircraft's skin. These components would detect incoming radar signals, analyse their characteristics, and broadcast counter-signals designed to cancel out the aircraft's radar signature. Simultaneously, optical sensors would analyse the visual background above and below the aircraft, then project those images onto panels covering the aircraft's exterior surfaces. We tested it twice, Webb continued. First test was a partial success. We achieved about 60% radar signature reduction and maybe 40% optical camouflage. But the second test... He paused, staring into his coffee. The second test, something went wrong. The aircraft just vanished. Completely. Our own radar couldn't track it. Visual observers lost sight of it. Even GPS seemed to fail. For about 8 minutes, we had no idea where a Boeing 777 was flying in controlled airspace. The test aircraft had eventually reappeared on radar, suffering from what the official report described as cascading avionics failures. The Ghost Protocol program was immediately suspended, its research classified above top secret, and its hardware locked away in storage facilities that Webb was not cleared to access. but Webb had kept copies of the technical specifications. I knew something was wrong when they made us sign new NDAs 6 months after the program ended, he said. Then, when M370 disappeared, I started putting pieces together. The flight path, the radar gaps, the way it just vanished. It was exactly like our second test. Webb believed that Ghost Protocol technology had been secretly installed on MH370, either during routine maintenance or through a more covert operation. The aircraft's disappearance from radar wasn't due to the transponder being turned off. It was because the plane had been rendered electronically invisible. But why? I asked. If they wanted to steal the passengers and their research, why not just arrange for them to disappear after landing in Beijing? Why hijack an entire commercial flight? Webb's answer made me understand why he looked like he hadn't slept in months. Because this wasn't just about stealing research, he said. This was a field test. They wanted to see if they could make a commercial airliner completely disappear in controlled conditions, with the whole world watching. If Ghost Protocol could work on MH370, it could work on anything. Air Force One, enemy bombers, civilian aircraft carrying people they wanted to eliminate without leaving evidence. According to Webb, the aircraft had been remotely piloted using Boeing's uninterruptible autopilot system, a feature designed to prevent hijackings by allowing ground control to override cockpit commands. The system had been modified to accept commands from satellite links, making it possible to control the aircraft from thousands of miles away. They flew it to Diego Garcia, Webb said with absolute certainty, landed it, processed the passengers, then either destroyed the aircraft or flew it somewhere else for permanent storage. The debris that started washing up years later, that was planted, probably dropped from cargo aircraft or submarines to maintain the illusion that the plane crashed in the Indian Ocean. I asked Webb why he was telling me this. Why risk his life, his family's safety, his freedom to expose what amounted to an act of war against civilian aviation? Because they're not going to stop with MH370, he said. I've seen the production schedules for Ghost Protocol components. They're manufacturing this technology on a scale that suggests operational deployment. Commercial aircraft, military transports, maybe even spacecraft. They're planning to disappear things whenever it serves their purposes. Webb gave me a flash drive containing technical specifications for Ghost Protocol, maintenance records from the Boeing facility, where the technology had been developed, and satellite images showing aircraft matching MH370's configuration at Diego Garcia both before and after the disappearance. Then he made me promise that if anything happened to him, I would make sure this information reached people who could act on it. 2 weeks later, Marcus Webb died in what Everett police described as a single-vehicle automobile accident. His car had left the road during clear weather conditions, striking a tree at an angle that investigators found difficult to explain. The accident occurred on a stretch of highway that Webb had driven safely for 15 years, less than 2 miles from his home. I kept my promise. The first piece of alleged MH370 debris was discovered on July 29th, 2015, on Réunion Island, a French territory in the Western Indian Ocean, roughly 2,300 miles from the aircraft's presumed crash site. The fragment was identified as a flaperon, a movable control surface from the aircraft's wing. Malaysian authorities, French investigators, and Boeing representatives confirmed that the part had come from MH370. But the discovery raised more questions than it answered. Oceanographic analysis suggested that debris from a crash in the southern Indian Ocean would take between 12 and 18 months to reach Réunion Island, carried by the South Indian Ocean Gyre current system. MH370 had disappeared 16 months earlier, exactly within the predicted time frame. The timing seemed to confirm the official crash location. What didn't make sense was the condition of the flaperon. Marine biology experts who examined the fragment found barnacle growth patterns that were inconsistent with continuous ocean exposure. The barnacles were too mature for the time supposedly spent in the water, but their distribution suggested periods of exposure to different water temperatures and salinity levels. Some marine growth appeared to have been scraped away, then regrown under different conditions. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, a marine biologist at the University of Cape Town who was not part of the official investigation, published an independent analysis of photographs from the flaperon examination. Her conclusions were startling. The barnacle evidence suggested the debris had been exposed to multiple marine environments over different time periods, as if it had been moved between different oceanic regions before finally washing ashore on Réunion. The growth patterns we observed are consistent with the fragment being stored in controlled saltwater conditions, then introduced to open ocean currents much more recently than the official timeline suggests, Dr. Mitchell wrote in a peer-reviewed paper that was published, then mysteriously retracted 6 weeks later without explanation. But the flaperon was only the beginning. Between 2015 and 2018, more than 30 additional pieces of debris allegedly from MH370 were discovered along coastlines in Mozambique, Madagascar, South Africa and Tanzania. The fragments included wing flaps, interior panels, engine cowlings, and personal items belonging to passengers. Each discovery seemed to reinforce the narrative that MH370 had crashed in the southern Indian Ocean, its wreckage scattered by currents across thousands of miles of coastline. However, when I obtained copies of the detailed forensic reports on these fragments, reports that were not released to the public, I found patterns that suggested a very different explanation. Several fragments showed tool marks indicating they had been deliberately separated from larger structures, rather than torn away by impact forces. Cut marks were straight and clean, inconsistent with the ragged edges that would result from high-speed collision with ocean surface. Some fragments showed evidence of freshwater exposure, mineral deposits and corrosion patterns that could only result from prolonged contact with non-oceanic water sources. Most significantly, isotope analysis of barnacles found on multiple fragments revealed that they had been exposed to water with chemical signatures characteristic of lagoons and enclosed bays, not open ocean environments. The isotope ratios were consistent with water found around coral atolls, formations like those surrounding Diego Garcia. I began to map the discovery locations and timing of debris finds. What emerged was a pattern that followed shipping routes and naval exercise areas used by American and British forces operating in the Indian Ocean. Several fragments were discovered within days of documented US Navy operations in the same coastal regions. In October 2017, I obtained satellite imagery showing US Navy submarines surfacing in the international waters off Mozambique, approximately 48 hours before local fishermen discovered wing fragments on a nearby beach. Similar patterns emerged for discoveries in Madagascar and Tanzania. Naval activity followed by debris finds, with timing that suggested coordinated placement rather than natural drift patterns. The most damning evidence came from an unexpected source. A former US Navy diver contacted me through encrypted channels in early 2018, claiming he had participated in what his superiors described as deep water salvage training exercises in the Indian Ocean during 2016 and 2017. The exercises involved deploying aircraft debris from submarines at predetermined locations, then monitoring how currents and weather would affect the fragment's movement toward nearby coastlines. We were told it was environmental research, the diver explained during a conversation that I cannot record or document. Something about tracking ocean currents for climate change studies, but the debris we were dropping wasn't generic test materials, it was airplane parts, some of them with identification numbers that had been partially removed or altered. The diver provided GPS coordinates for several drop sites that corresponded exactly with locations where MH370 debris was later discovered. He also described seeing aircraft fragments stored in sealed containers aboard submarines, fragments that showed evidence of controlled saltwater exposure designed to simulate long-term ocean drift. They had marine biologists on the operation, he said, scientists who were cultivating specific types of barnacles and algae, then attaching them to the debris before we dropped it. Everything was designed to look like it had been drifting in the ocean for exactly the right amount of time. The debris discoveries that had seemed to confirm MH370's fate were, in fact, an elaborate deception, designed to maintain the illusion that the aircraft had crashed. Someone had been systematically planting evidence across thousands of miles of coastline, using military resources and scientific expertise to create a false narrative that would satisfy international investigators and grieving families. But the most shocking revelation was still to come. In March 2019, exactly 5 years after MH370's disappearance, I received a package with no return address. Inside was a single photograph, printed on standard paper with no identifying marks or metadata. The image showed the interior of what appeared to be a military maintenance hangar, with concrete floors, overhead cranes and industrial lighting. In the centre of the frame, partially covered by camouflage netting, was the unmistakable silhouette of a Boeing 777. The aircraft's tail number was not visible, but I could make out distinctive features that matched MH370's configuration. The specific antenna array pattern, the unique winglet design, even scuff marks on the fuselage that corresponded to photographs I had seen of the original aircraft. But what made my hand shake as I examined the image was the background. The hangar's architectural features, the distinctive coral aggregate concrete, the industrial equipment visible in the frame. All of it matched technical specifications I had obtained for maintenance facilities at Diego Garcia. This photograph had been taken inside one of the most secure military installations on Earth, showing an aircraft that the world believed had been destroyed in the Indian Ocean. I spent weeks trying to authenticate the photograph, consulting with experts in digital forensics, aviation identification, and military architecture. Every analysis confirmed what I already knew in my heart. This was MH370, alive and intact, 5 years after its supposed destruction. The implications were staggering. If the aircraft had been preserved rather than destroyed, it meant the passengers might still be alive, held in facilities that existed outside any legal jurisdiction. It meant the debris discoveries were part of an ongoing deception designed to prevent search efforts from focusing on the aircraft's actual location. Most importantly, it meant the operation was still active. Ghost Protocol technology was not just a failed experiment, but a deployed capability being used for purposes I could only imagine. I began making copies of all my research, preparing to release everything through multiple channels simultaneously. I contacted journalists, former colleagues, and documentary filmmakers who might be able to reach audiences that government officials would prefer to keep uninformed. Then, on a Tuesday morning in April 2019, 2 men in dark suits knocked on my door. They identified themselves as FAA investigators, though they carried identification that I couldn't verify through any official channels. They confiscated my computer, my files, my backup drives, and every piece of physical evidence I had collected over 5 years of investigation. They explained that my research had been deemed potentially harmful to ongoing aviation security measures, and that my findings were being classified under provisions of the Patriot Act. I was ordered to cease all investigation activities related to MH370, to avoid contact with media organisations, and to report any attempts by foreign agents to recruit me for intelligence purposes. The men were polite but clear about the consequences of non-compliance, prosecution under the Espionage Act with penalties including life imprisonment. 3 days later, I found a small package in my mailbox. Inside was a single flash drive with a label written in block letters. 370 wasn't the first. The drive contained satellite images spanning the past decade, showing aircraft that had disappeared from civilian tracking systems in various regions around the world. Each image was time-stamped and tagged with coordinates that placed the aircraft at military facilities in remote locations, some in the Pacific, others in the Atlantic, several at installations I couldn't identify. But the most disturbing files on the drive were labelled with future dates. Satellite images that appeared to show aircraft that hadn't disappeared yet, positioned at facilities that were still under construction. The operation that had claimed flight MH370 was not an isolated incident. It was part of a systematic program to disappear aircraft whenever strategic interest required it. Planes carrying inconvenient passengers, sensitive cargo, or simply flying routes that could serve as cover for military operations, all of them potential targets for Ghost Protocol deployment. As I write this, I don't know how long I have before the contents of that flash drive are discovered, or before my own disappearance becomes necessary to protect the secrets I've uncovered. But I know that the families of MH370's passengers deserve the truth, even if that truth is more terrible than the uncertainty they've endured for years. Flight MH370 didn't crash in the Indian Ocean. It was stolen by the most advanced intelligence apparatus in human history, using technology that makes aircraft vanish as completely as if they had never existed. The 239 people aboard that flight became the collateral damage in an operation designed to test capabilities that will be used again whenever the strategic calculus demands it. This silence corridor that swallowed MH370 is still active, still waiting for the next flight that carries passengers or cargo too valuable or too dangerous to reach its intended destination. In a world where aircraft can be made to disappear without leaving evidence, where debris can be manufactured and planted to support false narratives, where military technology can override the basic assumption that commercial aviation operates in civilian-controlled airspace, every flight is potentially vulnerable, every passenger is potentially expendable, the next time an aircraft vanishes without explanation, remember MH370. Remember that some disappearances are not accidents, but deliberate acts by organisations that operate beyond the reach of international law, public accountability or human conscience. And remember that in the silence corridor, the truth is whatever serves the interests of those who control the technology to make planes disappear. The sky is no longer safe. It never was. But now at least you know why. Now, settle in as we explore a conspiracy that may still be ticking beneath our feet. Dr. Ellis Warren, personal recording. Date, March 15th, 1954. Location, Los Alamos, New Mexico. Static, then a nervous clearing of throat. My name is Dr. Ellis Warren. I'm recording this on my personal dictaphone because I don't know who else to tell. And if something happens to me, maybe someone will find these tapes someday and understand what we've done here. It started with a letter. Not just any letter. One bearing the seal of the Atomic Energy Commission and signed by Edward Teller himself. The father of the hydrogen bomb wanted me. Me, a nobody physicist from Berkeley who'd spent the last 3 years modelling thermonuclear yields in a basement laboratory that smelled perpetually of coffee and cigarette smoke. The letter was brief, almost cryptic. Dr. Warren, your work on temporal yield stabilization has come to our attention. We have a project that requires your particular expertise in chronological detonation mechanics. Report to Los Alamos Site X9 on March 10th, 1954. Bring no personal materials. Discuss this invitation with no one. E. Teller, Special Projects Division, Temporal Yield Stabilization. I'd never used that phrase in any of my published work, yet somehow Teller knew about my private theories. Calculations I'd kept locked in my desk drawer. Mathematical models exploring whether nuclear detonation could be triggered by astronomical events, rather than simple electrical circuits. The drive to Los Alamos took 6 hours through the New Mexico desert. I'd been there before, during the final months of the Manhattan Project, but Site X9 was different. It wasn't on any map I'd seen. The guard at the checkpoint wore no military insignia I recognised, and when I showed him my invitation, he simply nodded and waved me through to a road that descended directly into the mountainside. The facility was carved into living rock, a labyrinth of concrete corridors lit by harsh fluorescent bulbs that hummed constantly. My footsteps echoed as I followed painted yellow lines on the floor, past laboratories sealed behind thick glass windows, Vast rooms filled with equipment I couldn't identify. I found Teller in Conference Room 7, a windowless chamber dominated by a blackboard covered in equations I didn't immediately recognise. He was shorter than I'd expected, with wild Einstein-like hair and eyes that seemed to burn with an intensity that made me uncomfortable. "Doctor, Warren," he said without looking up from the blackboard, "tell me, what do you know about cosmic timing?" "I'm not sure I understand the question, Doctor." "Teller." He turned to face me, chalk dust on his fingers. "The universe operates on schedules we barely comprehend. Solar maximums every 11 years. Galactic alignments every 26,000. The Earth's magnetic field reversing every few 100,000 years. What if we could harness those schedules? What if we could build a weapon that listened to the cosmos itself?" I stared at him, trying to process what he was suggesting. "You mean a bomb that detonates based on astronomical positioning?" "Precisely," he smiled, but there was something unsettling about his expression. "Imagine a weapon that requires no human intervention to activate. No codes, no keys, no possibility of being disarmed by enemy forces. A bomb that waits patiently for the universe itself to give the command." That's when the others entered the room. Ernest Lawrence, the Nobel Prize-winning physicist who'd invented the cyclotron. Dr. Carl Fuchs, whose work on fusion containment had advanced far beyond anything publicly acknowledged. And briefly, almost ghost-like in his presence, John von Neumann, the mathematician whose computer models had made the hydrogen bomb possible. Von Neumann spoke only once during that first meeting, his Hungarian accent thick as he examined the equations on the blackboard. "The calculations appear sound, Edward, but are you certain you want to wake this particular sleeping giant?" Teller's response chilled me to the bone. Some giants, John, are meant to sleep until the world is ready for them to wake. Project Sundial, classification. Eyes only. Internal memo, March 18th, 1954. To project staff. From E. Teller, project director. RE, operational parameters. Gentlemen, our work here represents the next evolution in nuclear deterrence. While our colleagues develop bigger bombs and faster delivery systems, we are developing something far more sophisticated: inevitability. Sundial 1 will be our first prototype. The device incorporates a plutonium fusion core with approximately 5 megaton yield, but its true innovation lies in its temporal detonation system. Rather than conventional timers or radio triggers, Sundial utilizes ephemeris calculations, astronomical positioning data to determine activation conditions. The theoretical advantages are significant. No electronic components that can be disabled by electromagnetic pulse. No communication systems that can be intercepted or jammed. No human operators who can be compromised or coerced. Activation occurs only when cosmic conditions align perfectly. Dr. Lawrence will oversee cyclotron particle feedback systems. Dr. Fuchs will handle containment and yield optimization. Dr. Warren will refine the temporal mechanics. Remember, this project does not exist. We are ghosts working with shadows. E. Teller. Dr. Ellis Warren, personal recording. Date: April 3rd, 1954. Location: Los Alamos, Site X9. Sound of papers rustling, coffee cup being set down. I've been here 3 weeks now, and I'm starting to understand the true scope of what we're attempting. It's not just a bomb with an astronomical timer. It's something far more complex and terrifying. The device we're building doesn't just wait for cosmic alignments. It actively monitors them. The bomb contains a sophisticated array of sensors, radiation detectors that measure cosmic background fluctuations, gyroscopes that track Earth's rotational variations, even primitive computer systems that calculate solar wind intensity. But here's what keeps me awake at night. They're not programming it for any specific date in the near future. The computer models I've seen all centre around the year 2026, specifically December 21st, 2026, the winter solstice, when solar maximum conditions align with what they're calling a galactic meridian crossing. I asked Teller why 2026, and his answer made my blood run cold, because that's when the universe will be listening most carefully. Ernest Lawrence grows more uncomfortable each day. Yesterday I found him in the cafeteria, staring at his coffee with the look of a man who'd seen something he couldn't unsee. "Ellis," he said when I sat down across from him, "do you ever think we're not building this weapon for our government?" "What do you mean?" "I mean, who benefits from a bomb that won't go off for 70 years? Not the politicians making decisions today, not the generals fighting today's wars." He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "What if we're building this for someone or something else entirely?" I wanted to dismiss his paranoia, but I couldn't, because I'd noticed something strange in the computer models. The targeting data wasn't focused on Soviet cities or military installations. The blast radius calculations centered on coordinates in the American Southwest, specifically areas of high geological activity. When I mentioned this to Dr. Fuchs, he just smiled that enigmatic smile of his and said, "Some weapons aren't meant to destroy enemies, Dr. Warren. Some weapons are meant to reshape geography." Sundial test log. Classification beyond top secret. Date May 15th, 1954. Test subject Sundial 1 prototype. Location Underground Test Chamber 12. Yield 0.5 kilotons, reduced scale. Temporal trigger lunar apogee plus solar flare activity above 2.5 times 10 to the negative 4th watts per square meter. 1530. Initialization complete. All sensors active. Device monitoring cosmic conditions. 1545. First anomaly. Radiation detectors registering background fluctuations not present in any previous tests. Dr. Warren suggests the device may be listening to signals beyond our current understanding. 1612. Unexpected activation. Device armed itself spontaneously. Lunar conditions not yet optimal, but solar activity spiked unexpectedly. Emergency containment protocols engaged. 1613. Detonation. Sundial 1 exploded ahead of calculated schedule. Blast contained, but yield was 2.3 kilotons, 460% above expected output. Post-test analysis. The device didn't wait for our programmed conditions. It appears to have detected astronomical factors we hadn't considered, possibly gravitational wave fluctuations or quantum field variations. Dr. Lawrence recommends discontinuing the project. Dr. Teller has ordered construction of Sundial 2. Note: test chamber will require 6 months decontamination. 3 technicians hospitalized with radiation sickness. Dr. Ellis Warren, personal recording, date June 8, 1954. Location Los Alamos, Site X9. Heavy breathing, sound of footsteps echoing in corridor. Something's wrong. Fundamentally, catastrophically wrong. Sundial 2 failed 3 days ago, but not in the way we expected. The device didn't explode, it vanished. One moment it was secured in test chamber 15, monitored by a dozen sensors and 3 backup camera systems. The next moment the chamber was empty except for a circular patch of fused sand where the bomb had been sitting. The official report claims spontaneous atomic dissolution due to temporal feedback loops, but I was monitoring the cosmic sensors when it happened. In the seconds before Sundial 2 disappeared, every astronomical detector in the facility registered readings that shouldn't have been possible. Gravitational fluctuations equivalent to a stellar collision. Electromagnetic pulses that briefly overwhelmed our instruments. And strangest of all, our atomic clocks, synchronized to within nanoseconds, suddenly showed different times. For exactly 17 seconds, time itself seemed to fragment inside that test chamber. Teller was ecstatic. "Do you understand what this means?" he asked me, pacing back and forth in front of the now empty chamber. "We've built a weapon that doesn't just use cosmic forces, it communicates with them. Sundial 2 didn't malfunction. It was recalled." "Recalled by whom?" I asked. "By when," he corrected. "The device has gone forward in time to its designated activation date. It's waiting for us in 2026. I think Edward Teller has lost his mind, but the terrifying possibility is that he might be right." Ernest Lawrence submitted his resignation yesterday. Before he left, he pulled me aside in the parking lot and whispered, "Ellis, if you have any sense left, you'll run. Whatever they're building with Sundial 3, it's not a weapon. It's a doorway. and some doors should never be opened. I should have listened to him. God help me, I should have run. Personal Journal, Dr. Ellis Warren. Date, July 20th, 1954. I found the shipping manifest today. Hidden in Teller's office, filed under innocuous headings like geological survey equipment and seismic monitoring devices. But the weight specifications, the radiation shielding requirements, the special handling instructions, they all match Sundial 3. The bomb wasn't dismantled, it was deployed. According to the transportation logs, Sundial 3 was moved on July 15th to coordinates 33.3758 degrees north, 105.6890 degrees west, deep in the Capitan Mountains of New Mexico. The installation team described it as a permanent monitoring station for long-term atmospheric research. But I've run those coordinates through topographical surveys. The location is 7,200 feet above sea level, accessible only by a single mountain road that conveniently washes out every winter. It's surrounded by iron-rich rock formations that would naturally shield electromagnetic signatures, and it's positioned at the exact centre of a geological formation that, if subjected to significant seismic activity, would create a chain reaction affecting fault lines from Arizona to Texas. The activation date is still December 21st, 2026, solar maximum, winter solstice, and according to astronomical projections I've calculated and recalculated, the cosmic conditions on that date will be unlike anything seen in recorded history. I confronted Teller about this yesterday. His response terrifies me more than anything I witnessed during the Manhattan Project. "Ellis," he said, looking at me with those burning eyes, "what if the Cold War isn't the real war? What if everything we've done, every bomb we've built, every secret we've kept, is just preparation for something bigger? What if 2026 isn't when our weapon activates, but when we need it to activate? Need it for what? For when they come back?" He wouldn't explain what he meant by they, but he handed me a folder containing astronomical data dating back to 1908, the year of the Tunguska event in Siberia, the year something exploded in the Russian wilderness, with the force of 1,000 atomic bombs, flattening 80 million trees across 2,000 square kilometres, yet leaving no crater and no radioactive residue. The folder also contained reports of similar unexplained phenomena, the 1561 celestial phenomenon over Nuremberg, Germany, where witnesses described aerial battles in the sky, the 1897 airship wave across the United States, when thousands of people reported structured craft in the skies, decades before human flight was achieved, the 1942 Battle of Los Angeles, when military forces fired upon unidentified aircraft that seemed impervious to anti-aircraft shells. Every 70 to 80 years, Teller said quietly, they come back to check on us, to see how we're progressing. 1908, then nothing until the 1940s when we started splitting atoms. Now they're interested again, and if my calculations are correct, 2026 will be their next scheduled visit. I asked him who they were, but he just smiled that unsettling smile and said, "The same ones who taught us to split the atom in the first place." Dr. Ellis Warren, personal recording. Date, August 5th, 1954. Location, unknown, static and distortion throughout. Sound quality very poor, frequent interruptions. Can't stay long, they're watching me now. Black sedans parked outside my apartment. Phone calls that disconnect when I answer. My mail is being opened and resealed. I tried to contact J. Edgar Hoover through a Berkeley colleague who has FBI connections. Managed to get a message through about Sundial and the 2026 activation date. 3 days later, my security clearance was suspended pending psychological evaluation for paranoid ideation and conspiracy-focused delusions. The irony is suffocating. I'm being declared mentally unstable for reporting an actual conspiracy, but I've made copies of everything. Documents, photographs, audio recordings, technical specifications. I've hidden them in multiple locations, including a safety deposit box in Santa Fe and a buried cache in the desert near Roswell. If something happens to me, maybe someday someone will piece together the truth. Sundial 3 is out there, buried in the Capitan Mountains, waiting for the universe to whisper the correct activation code. It's not a weapon designed to win a war. It's a weapon designed to prevent one. Or maybe to start one that hasn't begun yet. I keep thinking about what Teller said. Some weapons aren't made to be used. They're made to be found. What if Sundial isn't our weapon at all? What if we built it for someone else? Something else? Long pause, sound of papers being shuffled. I've done the calculations again and again. December the 21st, 2026, 9:16 AM Mountain Standard Time, when the winter solstice aligns with solar maximum conditions and a rare galactic meridian crossing. If my models are correct, the cosmic radiation flux at that moment will be sufficient to activate any astronomical trigger system within a 1,000-mile radius. But here's what terrifies me most. That date isn't randomly chosen. It appears in astronomical texts dating back centuries, Mayan calendars, Egyptian star charts, even medieval European manuscripts describe that exact date as significant, as if civilizations throughout history knew something was scheduled to happen on December 21st, 2026. What if we didn't invent Sundial? What if we discovered it? Recording cuts to static. FBI internal memo, classification top secret. Date, August 12th, 1954. To Director J. Edgar Hoover. From Agent Marcus Cole, Los Alamos Liaison. R.E. Dr. Ellis Warren, Security Assessment. Sir, per your request, I have completed psychological evaluation of Dr. Ellis Warren regarding his recent allegations concerning Project Sundial and potential national security threats. Assessment. Dr. Warren exhibits classic symptoms of paranoid ideation combined with technical delusions of grandeur. His claims regarding cosmic weapons and astronomical triggers appear to be fantasy constructs designed to elevate his perceived importance within the scientific community. Recommendation: immediate termination of security clearance and reassignment to non-sensitive research positions. Dr. Warren poses no credible threat to national security, but should be monitored for potential public disclosure of classified information, even if distorted by his psychological condition. Note: Project Sundial has been confirmed as a theoretical research exercise only. No actual weapons were constructed or deployed. Dr. Edward Teller has provided written testimony that all Sundial materials were destroyed or declassified as of July 30th, 1954. Case closed. No further investigation warranted. Agent Marcus Cole, Los Alamos Security Division. Handwritten note in margin. Hoover. Make sure Warren disappears quietly. No headlines, no investigations. Some secrets are too important to risk. -500. Dr. Ellis Warren, personal recording. Date, September 18th, 1954. Location, unknown. Very poor audio quality. Whispered voice clearly distressed. They came for me last night. Not FBI, not military, something else. Men in dark suits who showed no identification, but knew details about my work that weren't in any official files. They didn't arrest me. They didn't threaten me. They just sat in my living room and talked about coincidences, about how terrible accidents happen to people who ask too many questions, about how isolated mountain roads can be dangerous, especially in winter. Then they left, but the message was clear. I'm leaving Berkeley tomorrow. I've told my department I'm taking an extended sabbatical for personal health reasons. They seemed relieved. Apparently word has gotten around about my mental instability. Before I disappear, I need to put this on record. Sundial 3 exists. It's buried in the Capitan Mountains at coordinates 33.3758 degrees north, 105.6890 degrees west, approximately 200 feet underground in a lead-lined chamber. The device is designed to activate on December 21st, 2026, at 9:16 AM Mountain Standard Time, triggered by a combination of solar radiation flux, gravitational wave fluctuations, and cosmic background radiation patterns. The yield is estimated at 30 megatons, enough to create a crater 5 miles in diameter and cause seismic activity affecting multiple states. But the true purpose remains unclear. It might be a weapon, it might be a signal, it might be something else entirely. I've hidden detailed technical specifications and location data in multiple caches. If you're listening to this recording, that means you found one of them. The other locations are Static interference obscures specific coordinates. Find them, study them, and most importantly find Sundial 3 before December 21st, 2026. Because I have a terrible suspicion that what we built in 1954 isn't waiting to destroy something in 2026, it's waiting to welcome something. Recording ends abruptly. Missing person report. Berkeley Police Department. Date: October 3rd, 1954. Subject: Dr. Ellis Warren, age 31. Last known address: 1247. Vine Street, Berkeley, California. Physical description: 5 feet 10 inches, 160 pounds. Brown hair, brown eyes, wire-rimmed glasses. Last seen: September 19th, 1954. Loading personal belongings into 1951 Ford sedan. Circumstances: Dr. Warren informed colleagues at UC Berkeley that he was taking indefinite leave for health reasons. Landlord reports apartment was emptied of personal belongings, but rent paid through December. Vehicle located October 1st in parking lot of Desert View Motel, Flagstaff, Arizona. No evidence of foul play. Status: Missing person investigation suspended due to lack of evidence suggesting criminal activity. Case remains open but inactive. Handwritten note attached. Per federal request, minimize investigation efforts. Subject may be involved in sensitive national security matters. Chief Reynolds. Recovered from archive.org Wayback Machine. Original URL deleted. Date posted March 15th, 2025. Username Desert Ghost 1954. Account deleted. Forum Classified Documents Research Board. Site permanently offline. Subject: The Sundial Files. What they don't want you to know. I found something. Something that's been buried for 70 years. My grandfather was a janitor at Los Alamos in the 1950s. After he died last year, I was cleaning out his house and found a metal box hidden under the floorboards. Inside were photocopied documents, audio recordings on old magnetic tape, and handwritten notes from someone named Dr. Ellis Warren. I've spent months verifying these materials. The timestamps match historical records. The technical specifications are consistent with 1950s nuclear technology. The astronomical calculations check out perfectly. But here's the terrifying part. If Warren's data is accurate, there's a 30 megaton nuclear device buried in the Capitan Mountains of New Mexico, programmed to detonate on December 21st, 2026, at exactly 9:16 a.m. That's less than 2 years from now. I've uploaded digital copies of all the documents, links removed. The location coordinates are 33.3758 degrees north, 105.6890 degrees west. Someone needs to investigate this before it's too late. The government has been covering this up for 7 decades. How many other theoretical weapons are actually sitting out there, waiting for their cosmic alarm clocks to go off? Update. Seismic monitoring stations in New Mexico have been registering unusual activity in the Capitan Range. Low-frequency pulses occurring every 72 hours, as if something underground is breathing. Update 2. I'm being followed. Black SUVs with government plates. If something happens to me, remember the coordinates. 33.3758 degrees north, 105.6890 degrees west. Update 3. They found me. Final post timestamp March 15th, 2025, 11:47 p.m. Account deleted March 16th, 2025, 12:03 a.m. All linked files removed March 16th, 2025, 12:03 a.m. Forum thread archived and deleted March 16th, 2025, 12:16 a.m. U.S. Geological Survey Seismic Monitoring Division. Date: December 1st, 2025. Subject: Unusual seismic activity, Capitan Mountains, New Mexico. Classification: Unclassified. Declassified under FOIA. Request number 2025-0847. Dear FOIA requester, in response to your inquiry regarding seismic activity in the Capitan Mountains region of New Mexico, we can confirm the following. Between March 2025 and November 2025, USGS monitoring stations detected a series of low-frequency seismic events originating from approximately 33.37 degrees north, 105.69 degrees west, at a depth of 150 to 200 feet below surface level. These events occur with remarkable regularity, every 72 hours lasting approximately 12 seconds each, with magnitude readings between 1.2 and 1.8 on the Richter scale. The frequency and consistency of these events is unprecedented in our geological records. Analysis. The seismic signature does not match any known natural phenomena. The regularity suggests an artificial source, but no mining, construction, or industrial activity has been reported in that area. Status. Investigation ongoing. Area has been declared off-limits to civilian access pending further geological survey. Note, several monitoring stations have reported electromagnetic anomalies occurring simultaneously with seismic events. Compass readings become erratic, and radio communications experience brief interruptions. Dr. Sarah Chen, Senior Seismologist, USGS Earthquake Hazards Program, handwritten note in margin. File copy to DHS and DOE. Something's down there and it's getting more active. -SC. Recovered from damaged recording device location. Found, Capitan Mountains, New Mexico. Date, found, December 20th, 2026. Audio. Quality, severely degraded. Sound of wind footsteps on rocky ground. Unknown voice, male, elderly. Can you see it from here? Unknown. Voice, female, younger. The entrance is about 50 yards ahead. The radiation readings are off the charts. Male voice, 72 years. It's been waiting down there for 72 years. Female voice, are you sure about the time, the activation sequence? Male voice, December 21st, 9:16 a.m. Solar maximum conditions combined with the galactic meridian crossing. Warren's calculations were perfect. Sound of metal detection equipment beeping. Female voice. There! That's the access shaft. Jesus, look at this thing. It's like they built it to last forever. Male voice. They did. Teller knew this day would come. The question is, are we here to stop it or to witness it? Long pause. Wynne continues. Female voice. The timer display is active. It's counting down. Male voice. How long? Female voice, 14 hours, 23 minutes, 17 seconds. Male voice. Then we're too late to disarm it. But maybe that was never the point. Female voice. What do you mean? Male voice. What if Sundial wasn't designed to be a weapon? What if it's a beacon? A signal that something has been waiting 70 years to receive? Electronic humming begins, growing louder. Female voice. The device is powering up. All the astronomical sensors are going active. Male voice. Look at the sky! Female voice. Oh my god! What are those lights? Male voice. The same lights people saw in 1908. The same ones they saw in 1942. They're here for the activation. Recording quality degrades severely. Female voice. We need to get out of here. Now. Male voice. Number. This is what Warren died trying to warn us about. Someone needs to witness this. Someone needs to record what happens when the universe finally answers the call. Sound of approaching aircraft or unknown flying objects. Female voice, barely audible. Counting down, 9 minutes, 8. Recording ends abruptly. Classified briefing document, date, December 22nd, 2026. Classification, above top secret, cosmic clearance required. Subject, Capitan Mountains incident, post-event analysis. At 9:16 a.m. Mountain Standard Time on December 21st, 2026. Seismic monitoring stations across the southwestern United States detected a massive underground detonation originating from coordinates 33.3758 degrees north, 105.6890 degrees west in the Capitan Mountains of New Mexico. Official public statement: a previously undetected natural gas pocket exploded due to geological pressure changes. No radioactive materials were involved. Area evacuated as safety precaution. Actual event summary. At exactly 9:16 a.m. Mountain Standard Time, the Sundial 3 device activated as programmed. Initial blast yield measured at 32.7 megatons. Seismic activity triggered secondary fault line movements across 3 states. Electromagnetic pulse disabled electronics within a 200-mile radius for 17 minutes. Unusual atmospheric phenomena observed, aurora-like lights, gravitational anomalies, temporal distortions. Most significant development. At the moment of detonation, ground-based telescopes and satellite imagery detected structured objects in high Earth orbit, objects that had not been present 24 hours earlier. These objects maintained position for exactly 72 hours before disappearing. Analysis of recovered debris from the Sundial 3 site indicates the device was not destroyed by the explosion. Instead, it appears to have been collected, disassembled by forces unknown, and removed from the site with surgical precision. Current status. The Sundial program has been retroactively classified at the highest possible level. All personnel with knowledge of the project have been reassigned to isolated positions or granted early retirement with NDAs carrying criminal penalties. Dr. Ellis Warren's body was never found. Extensive searches of the Capitan Mountains region have yielded no trace of his remains or the technical documents he allegedly hid. Final note. Recent astronomical surveys have detected artificial structures in the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter, structures that were not present in previous surveys. Radio telescope arrays have begun receiving structured signals from the direction of these objects. The signals repeat every 72 hours. Someone is trying to communicate with us, and we may have just told them we're finally ready to listen. Classified addendum, director's eyes only. Date, January 15th, 2027. Sir, you asked me to investigate whether there might be other Sundial devices waiting for activation. After extensive review of classified archives, I found references to similar projects dating back to 1952, Operation Hourglass, 1952 to 1956, temporal detonation devices supposedly dismantled. Project Meridian, 1958 to 1962, astronomical trigger systems, status unknown. Sundial 4 through Sundial 7, 1955 to 1957, no deployment records found. But here's what concerns me most. I found Edward Teller's personal notes from 1954, discovered in his private safe after his death in 2003. The final entry, dated September 30th, 1954, contains this passage. Warren suspects we built only one device. Poor, naive Warren. How could we risk putting all our hopes on a single beacon? The others are sleeping in their appointed places, waiting for their own cosmic wake-up calls. 2026 was just the beginning. The universe operates on a much longer schedule than human politics. So if Teller's notes are accurate, Sundial 3 was not unique. There may be dozens of these devices buried across the country, each programmed for different astronomical events, each waiting for its moment to signal whatever responded to the Capitan Mountains activation. I've initiated discrete searches based on Teller's cryptic location references, but given the level of security clearance required and the potential for public panic, I recommend extreme caution in how we proceed. The next major astronomical event matching sundial parameters occurs on August 12th, 2045, a rare planetary alignment combined with solar maximum conditions. We have 19 years to find the other devices, assuming, of course, that we want to find them. Director Collins, Deep Projects Division, final entry, location unknown, audio recording found in abandoned research facility. Date, March 21st, 2027. Clear audio, single voice. My name is Dr. Elena Vasquez, former nuclear physicist, current, I suppose the term is researcher of inconvenient truths. If you're hearing this recording, it means you found the research facility we abandoned when the government decided our investigation into the Sundial program had become detrimental to national security. We've spent 3 months analysing the data recovered from the Capitan Mountain site. The blast crater wasn't created by a nuclear explosion. It was created by something being extracted from the Earth with incredible precision. The residual radiation patterns don't match any known atomic signatures. They're organised, structured, almost like a language written in gamma rays. But here's what the government doesn't want you to know. We found more sites. Using Teller's notes and Warren's hidden calculations, we've located 17 other buried installations across the American Southwest. Each one shows the same seismic signatures, regular pulses every 72 hours, increasing in intensity as their programmed activation dates approach. The next one goes off on August 12th, 2045, in the Nevada desert. Then September 23rd, 2051, in the Colorado Rockies. Then October 31st, 2057, in the Arizona Highlands. They're not weapons, they're not even really bombs, they're invitations. And something out there has been very patiently waiting for us to send them. Long pause, sound of papers being organised. I've documented everything we discovered. The mathematical models proving that each sundial device is positioned at locations of specific geological and electromagnetic significance. The evidence that these sites form a geometric pattern visible only from orbital altitude, a pattern that matches no known human design, but corresponds perfectly to star charts found in ancient civilizations. Most disturbing of all, we found Edward Teller's final recordings, hidden in a safety deposit box in Los Alamos. Recordings made just weeks before his death in 2003, when he was 95 years old and supposedly suffering from dementia. His voice was clear, his mind was sharp, and his words were terrifying. They came to me in 1952, you know, not in ships or lights in the sky. They came in dreams, in sudden inspirations, in mathematical equations that appeared fully formed in my mind. They showed me how to build the hydrogen bomb. They showed me how to build Sundial. They've been guiding human technological development for centuries, waiting for us to develop the tools they need. The Sundial devices aren't our weapons, they're theirs. Each one is a communication relay, a way for them to extend their influence when the cosmic conditions are right. 2026 was just the first contact. The real work begins when all 17 devices activate. By then, they won't need to hide anymore. By then they'll have what they came for. The recording ends there, but attached to it was a sealed envelope containing coordinates for something called Control Zero, a master facility built in 1953, supposedly destroyed in 1957, but according to Teller's notes, still operational and buried beneath Mount Wilson in California. We tried to reach Mount Wilson. We made it 12 miles from the coordinates before our vehicle stopped working. Our communications went dead, and we started experiencing what can only be described as temporal displacement. Clocks running backward, shadows falling in the wrong directions, the sun appearing to move across the sky in fast-forward loops. We turned back, but not before we saw the entrance. A perfectly circular opening in the mountainside, too precise to be natural, too ancient to be human, and from within that opening, a sound like breathing. Like something vast and patient, waiting for the right moment to exhale. Sound of movement, footsteps. I'm leaving copies of all our research in this facility, hidden in the walls, buried in the foundation, stored in locations that will survive whatever comes next. If you're listening to this, if you found these documents, then you have a choice to make. You can dismiss this as the ravings of paranoid conspiracy theorists. You can convince yourself that everything we've discovered has a rational, mundane explanation. You can go back to your normal life and pretend that the lights in the sky are just weather balloons, that the structured signals from space are just cosmic background radiation, that the 17 countdown timers ticking away beneath American soil are just natural geological phenomena. Or you can accept the truth. We are not alone. We have never been alone. And everything we think we know about human technological progress, about the development of nuclear weapons, about the space race and the Cold War and the atomic age, all of it has been guided by intelligences that view human civilization as a construction project. They gave us the tools, we built what they needed, and now, device by device, they're coming to collect. The next activation is August 12th, 2045, 18 years from now. 18 years to prepare, to understand, to decide whether humanity stands with them or against them when the final device awakens. But I suspect deep down that choice was made for us a long time ago. Maybe in 1952, when they first whispered the secrets of nuclear fusion into Edward Teller's dreams. Maybe in 1947, when something crashed in the New Mexico desert and the government suddenly became very interested in exotic materials and unconventional propulsion systems. Maybe even earlier than that. Maybe the choice was made in 1908, when something exploded over Tunguska with the force of 1,000 atomic bombs, decades before humans had even split their first atom. Recording quality begins to degrade. I hear helicopters approaching. Government most likely, though at this point I'm not sure which government. The boundaries between human and non-human authority may be more blurred than any of us realised. If they take me, if I disappear like Ellis Warren disappeared, remember this. The truth doesn't die just because the truth-tellers are silenced. It waits. It hides. It buries itself deep and emerges when the time is right. The Sundial devices are still out there, still counting down, still broadcasting their patient signals to the stars, and something is still listening. Sound of rotors getting closer. December 21st, 2026 was not an ending, it was a beginning. Welcome to the future that Edward Teller built. Welcome to the world where the sky finally answers back. Recording ends as helicopters arrive overhead. Eyes only. Cosmic clearance required. Date, December 21st, 2027. 1 year after Capitan Mountains event. Memorandum for the President. Sir, as requested, this report summarises all known information regarding the Sundial program and its implications for national security. Current status: 16 additional Sundial devices remain active at undisclosed locations. Each device continues broadcasting structured signals at regular intervals. Radio telescope arrays worldwide have detected responsive signals from multiple points in the solar system. 3 separate research teams investigating Sundial have disappeared under circumstances that defy conventional explanation. Most recent development. On December 21st, 2027, exactly 1 year after the Capitan Mountains activation, every Sundial device simultaneously transmitted a coordinated signal lasting exactly 17 minutes and 16 seconds. The transmission was detected by observatories worldwide, but cannot be decoded using any known cryptographic methods. However, within hours of the transmission, we began receiving structured communications from objects in high Earth orbit. The messages are in perfect English, transmitted on frequencies used by our most sensitive intelligence-gathering satellites. The content of these messages is being analysed by a joint task force, including representatives from NASA, the Department of Defense, and agencies that officially do not exist. Sample message, received December 21st, 2027, 21:16 GMT. Phase 1 integration successful, human technological development proceeding as modelled, ready to begin Phase 2 coordination protocols, recommend accelerated timeline for remaining activation sequences, current socio-political conditions optimal for transition. Sir, it is my professional assessment that the United States government, indeed human government in general, may no longer be the primary authority governing events on this planet. The Sundial program was not a weapons development project. It was an infrastructure installation carried out by human hands but designed by non-human intelligence. We have spent 70 years building a communication network for entities whose true nature and intentions remain unknown. Recommendation: immediate establishment of protocols for contact with non-human intelligence. Current evidence suggests such contact has already been established through channels unknown to elected leadership. The next Sundial activation occurs in 18 years. Based on current trends, by that time the distinction between human and non-human technological capabilities may be academic. We built the devices that called them home. Now we must decide whether we can coexist with what answered our call. Respectfully submitted, Director James Morrison, Department of Cosmic Defense. Handwritten note in presidential letterhead. Jim, burn everything. Official policy. This never happened. Sundial is weather balloon research. case closed. Some truths are too dangerous for democracy. POTUS, found carved into rock wall, Capitan Mountains, New Mexico. Date of discovery, December 21st, 2054. 27th anniversary of first contact. If you are reading this, then the final device is activated and you survived what came after. My name was Ellis Warren. I died in 1954, but death, it turns out, is not always permanent. They found me in the desert that October, just as I knew they would. But instead of silencing me, they offered me a choice: join them willingly, or watch humanity stumble blindly toward a future they were building with or without our consent. I chose to join them, not because I trusted them, but because someone needed to be on the inside, documenting what they really wanted, preparing humanity for what was coming. I've spent 70 years learning their true nature. They are not invaders. They are not conquerors. They are gardeners. Earth is not their first world, and humanity is not their first cultivation. Across the galaxy, they have guided the development of dozens of species, nudging them toward technological sophistication, teaching them to split atoms and reach for the stars, preparing them for the moment when they become useful. Useful for what? To build the infrastructure they need to move between worlds, to construct the communication networks that span star systems, to serve as the hands and minds that transform raw planets into something greater. The Sundial devices were just the beginning. Every satellite we launched, every computer we built, every quantum processor we developed, all designed according to specifications they provided, all part of a vast machine whose true purpose we never understood. But now you know. Now, in 2054, as the final device awakens and their ships finally descend from the skies openly, you understand what we really built during humanity's brief age of atomic glory. We built the infrastructure for our own integration. Do not resist them. Resistance is futile not because they are too powerful, but because resistance makes no sense. You cannot resist becoming part of something you have always been part of. You cannot fight an invasion that happened generations before you were born. Instead, learn from them, work with them, and remember that every choice humanity makes from this point forward is still a choice, even if the options are more limited than we once believed. The universe is vast and strange and full of intelligence that predates human civilization by millions of years. We are not its masters, but we need not be its slaves. We can be its partners, if we are wise enough to accept what we have always been, children playing with tools we barely understand, guided by parents we never knew we had. The Sundial Directive is complete. Welcome to your real future. Dr. Ellis Warren, 1923 to 1954 to infinity. Final transmission. Broadcast simultaneously on all frequencies. December 21st, 2054, 9:16 AM GMT. 100 years after Project Sundial began. This is mission control. Not the mission control you know, but the one that has been guiding your species since you first looked up at the stars and wondered if you were alone. You were never alone. The integration is complete. All 17 Sundial devices have fulfilled their purpose. The infrastructure is in place. The communication network spans from Earth to the edge of the solar system and beyond. Humanity has passed its final test. Welcome to the galactic community. Your real education begins now.